This is the second part from my lore guide for beginners, so if you're confused about anything being said in this video, please check out part 1, the link will be in the description. So, you've already mastered the basics of the game and want to know more about the core ideas in lore? Luckily, I've got you covered. By the end of this video, you will have a rough understanding of the deck types in lore, the best way to play them yourselves, or how to react to them. Then I will give you some decks to play around with for each category so you can try them out yourselves. And lastly, I've tried to compile all of the most important tips that helped me to climb into Masters and even into the top 150 players in EU. And I'm sure you will also be able to profit from them. First and foremost, we'll have a look at some of the most basic deck types. There's an almost infinite number of options you have regarding deck types, but roughly speaking you are able to break the ideas down into 4 main categories. Type 1. High aggression decks. These are decks that aim to kill your nexus within the first, let's say, 4 to 7 turns in the game. These decks are often run with Darius, Misfortune, Jinx and any other champions that are based around the idea of killing you quickly, most of them being from Noxus or Billig Water. Quick note for you beginners out there, every deck is made up of 2 regions at most, meaning you will be limited to cards from those 2 regions, even though there are exceptions to this of course. In any case, you will be able to see the regions at the start of a game, giving you a rough idea about what you're up against. Type 2. Mid-range decks. These are decks that peak around turn 5 to 6 and want to overwhelm you around exactly that time. These decks are often played with Swain, Jarvan, Shen, Fiora or Hikarin. It's quite easy to identify them as most of the champions are around 4 to 6 cost. These decks focus most often on getting high value plays in the earlier turns and then overwhelming you around the mid game. Type 3. Late game decks. These decks are aiming to play the long game. They want to survive until they have 10 mana crystals to really start to win the game, with big units like Aurelion Sol, Viego, Lissandra, Trundle and many expensive followers to complement this. Your main focus should be to kill them before they get a chance to pull their strategy off. Type 4. Lastly, they are cheese and value decks. Either of them are harder to classify, as their main goal is either getting a win condition off, such as leveling up their Azir, and getting the Emperor deck, giving them insane value. Or maybe they're just running a deck that focuses on the idea of continuously making the deck stronger. Good examples of such decks would be Veigar, Nora, Azir, Kayle, Seraphine, Maokai and many more. It's hard to give you a general tip on how to beat these decks, but after you've seen them once or twice, you will get a pretty good feel for what they are trying to do. And your job is to deny exactly that. Speaking of deck types, I will now introduce some decks fitting exactly in these categories, so you can try them out, get a feel for them, and maybe discover something you like as well. Aggression type decks. One of the most popular aggro decks since the introduction of Gwen has been Red Gwen. Red Gwen runs Katarina, that's where the red part comes from, and Gwen. The aim of this deck is to force your opponent to block in unfavorable conditions, letting them trade into 25 quick attack units and killing them early by rallying continuously. Mid-range. Echo Jinx has always been one of the most popular mid-range decks, as you're able to build up your board quickly in the early game and continuously revive your units with the leveled up Echo in the mid-game, ultimately overwhelming your opponent. Another great deck would be Gangplank Sejuani. This deck tries to get your opponent low early and then kill them off quickly with Gangplank or Sejuani. Late game. One of the most popular decks at the moment is Aatrox Kayn. Even though you could argue this deck can be classified as a mid-range deck, the value you get in the late game with the Darken units is insane and definitely puts this in the top spot. Finally, there's the cheese category. You have an almost infinite number of possible decks here, but one of the most common ones would be FTR, which aims to survive until you're able to play FTR and finish off your opponent this way. Another fan favorite would be Caitlyn Teemo, killing your opponent through puff caps. The only downside of this deck is that you will start to hate yourself and your opponent will do the same, so think twice before you try this one out. Concerning value, you can never go wrong with Heimerdinger, as he's one of the most high value cards in the game, if you can keep him alive that is. Very similar to this would be Veigar, which again gives you insane value as long as he survives on board. So, knowing all of this, how do you actually start getting better at the game? My first tip would be use a deck tracker. There are many options for this, but I would personally recommend the Mastering Runeterra deck tracker, as it doesn't run ads as some of the competitors do and is simple in its design and usage. By using a deck tracker, you can start to look at the chances of getting certain cards, keeping track of which cards you've already played, and generally get an overall feel for how the game is going. On top of that, most deck trackers also keep track of the cards your opponent played. This is of great importance, as you're then able to tell what counterplay your opponent could go for during your turn. Then of course, subscribe to the channel. This may not have an immediate effect on your gameplay, but it would help me out massively, so thanks. My next big tip is start looking up meta decks. By looking up the most commonly played cards and decks at the moment, you will get a feel for what you're up against, which cards your opponent could play at any point, and about what he's trying to achieve in the game. Hand in hand with this goes the idea of hand reading. I have an entire different video concerning this topic, which I'll also link in the description. But to sum it up here, you are trying to predict what your enemy does before he's doing it, giving you the time to play around it by keeping spells in hand or not committing too much to the board and such. Also, if you want to have the highest chances of winning, consider playing one of the meta decks yourself. There's a reason why they're so popular. Most of these decks are well optimized and can convince with a high win rate. So maybe try considering playing one of them. My next big tip would be read the game stage. Again, this sounds simple, but that doesn't make it any less important. If you're on turn 9 and you currently have 4 strong followers on board, do you really need to play another one? As long as you're already winning, you should consider not adding onto this, to lessen the impact of big removal spells, such as the Ruination, which could instantly lose you the game if you play into it. Another obvious tip, but much underrated one, is take your time. Think about why you're doing something instead of just putting down units without any thought. If you're able to justify it in your head, go for it, but often you will find out that maybe there's something else you could do. An example here would be, do you really want to play your champion already while your opponent hasn't played a single removal spell yet and has 6+ spell mana? There's a good chance that it would just die instantly, so maybe see if you don't want to do something else instead. Another great tip that goes hand in hand with that is to record your own games and watch them afterwards. By recording your games, you can go over what you did and maybe analyze some of the mistakes you made. This is a great way to learn from your own mistakes and should improve your gameplay in the long run. And last but not least, if you're serious about climbing the LoR ladder, play 1 or 2 decks at most. This might seem boring, but with each game you will learn something new about the strengths and weaknesses of your deck against your matchup, and you will become a top tier player, at least with the deck you chose. To sum it up, there are many more ways to improve, but listing all of these small ways to improve would honestly take hours and would go beyond the scope of this video. And if you have any more questions about a particular topic, please feel free to ask in the comments and I'm happy to answer. Thank you for watching, please consider subscribing and have a good day.